The circle of thoughts, information, strength of will and shades of feelings of the less perfect person can be covered by that of the more perfect person but not vice versa. The former circle is common to both, but the latter is not. Apart from certain exceptions, the base of common interests and actions among the higher and lower elements can be accomplished only if the higher elements are able to disclaim their individual superiority. The same result also follows from the fact that the level of common ground cannot be as high for equally outstanding personalities as for each of them existing independently. For it is precisely the highest attainments of different people that are usually differentiated according to very diverse aspects, and they meet only on a much lower general level, beyond which the individually significant potentialities often diverge to such an extent that any communication at all becomes impossible. What is common to people in the biological aspect, the oldest and therefore the most secure inheritance is, in general, the cruder, undifferentiated and unintellectual element of their nature. In the typical relationship in which the contents of life must pay for their common elements, their service to understanding and conformity by their relatively low standards, in which the individual has to reduce himself to what is common to all and has to renounce his personal level either because the other person has lower standards or because, although their standards are the same, they apply to another field. The form of this relationship is illustrated by objects no less than by persons. The only difference is that what in this case is a process in real entities in the other case happens not to the objects themselves but to the conceptions of their value. The fact that the most refined and unique object can be had for money just as much as the most trivial and crude one creates a relationship between them which is foreign to their quality, and occasionally it may result in a trivialization and a loss of the specific valuation of the unique object, whereas the trivial one has neither anything to lose nor to gain. The fact that the one is expensive and the other cheap is not always a compensation, particularly for general valuations which do not lend themselves to individual comparisons. Nor can it be offset by the undeniable psychological occurrence that the common denominator of money itself sets individual differences between objects more sharply into relief. The leveling effect of the money equivalent becomes quite evident as soon as one compares a beautiful and original but purchasable object with another equally significant one which is not purchasable. We feel from the outset that this latter object possesses a reserve, an independence, a right to be exclusively evaluated according to the objective ideal. In short, it possesses a distinction that the other object cannot attain. Even for the best and most exquisite object, the characteristic of being available for money purchase is a locus minoris resistentia that cannot resist the importunity of the inferior searching for contact with it. For in so far as money, because it is nothing by itself, gains greatly in value by this possibility, so, conversely, is the individual significance of different objects of equal value degraded through their exchangeability, however indirectly or imaginary this may be. After all, this is probably the underlying motive for the way in which we characterize certain things such as well-worn phrases, modes of behavior, musical tunes, etc., somewhat contemptuously as negotiable currency. It seems that coinage, the most negotiable object of all, calls not only for negotiability as the point of comparison and as its expression. Sometimes, at least, the factor of exchange must be added. Everyone accepts them and everyone uses them again, without any specific interest in their content, just as is the case with money. Everyone has it in his pocket, in stock. It does not require any transformation to serve its purpose under any circumstances. Whether given or received, its relation to the individual does not obtain any individual coloring or specific qualities. It does not, as do other contents of speaking or acting, affect the style of the personality, but slips through it unaltered like money through a purse. Leveling is the cause as well as the effect of the exchangeability of objects, just as certain words may be exchanged without further ado because they are trivial and they become trivial because they are usually exchanged without further ado. The coldness and frivolity that so much distinguishes the present from earlier treatment of objects is certainly due, in part, to the mutual de-individualization and leveling brought about by the common levels of money value. The exchangeability that is expressed in money must inevitably have repercussions upon the quality of commodities themselves, or must interact with it. The disparagement of the interest in the individuality of a commodity leads to a disparagement of individuality itself. If the two sides to a commodity are its quality and its price, then it seems logically impossible for the interest to be focused on only one of these sides, for cheapness is an empty word if it does not imply a low price for a relative good quality, and good quality is an economic attraction only for a correspondingly fair price. And yet this conceptual impossibility is psychologically real and effective. The interest in the one side can be so great that its logically necessary counterpart completely disappears. The typical instance of one of these cases is the 50-cent bazaar. The principle of valuation in the modern money economy finds its clearest expression here. It is not the commodity that is the center of interest here, but the price, a principle that in former times not only would have appeared shameless but would have been absolutely impossible. It has been rightly pointed out that the medieval town, despite all the progress it embodied, still lacked the extensive capital economy, and that this was the reason for seeking the ideal of the economy not so much in the expansion, which is possibly only through cheapness, but rather in the quality of the goods offered. Hence the great contributions of the applied arts, the rigorous control of production, the strict policing of basic necessities, etc. Such is one extreme pole of the series, whose other pole is characterized by the slogan, cheap and bad, a synthesis that is possibly only if we are hypnotized by cheapness and are not aware of anything else. The leveling of objects to that of money reduces the subjective interest first in their specific qualities and then, as a further consequence, in the objects themselves. The production of cheap trash is, as it were, the vengeance of the objects for the fact that they have been ousted from the focal point of interest by a merely indifferent means. All this has probably clearly illustrated what a radical contrast exists between a money economy and all its consequences and the values of distinction that have been sketched out earlier. Money thoroughly destroys that self-respect that characterizes the distinguished person and becomes embedded in certain objects and their appreciation. It forces an extraneous standard upon things, a standard that is quite alien to distinction. By arranging things in a series in which only quantitative differences are valid, it deprives them, on the one hand, of their difference and distance of one from another and on the other of the right to reject any relationship or any qualification by comparison with others. These are precisely the two factors whose combination determines the peculiar ideal of distinction. The enhancement of personal values that characterizes this ideal seems to be so transcended, even in its projection into objects, as far as the effectiveness of money is concerned, that the objects are made common in every sense of the word and are thus completely opposed, even in terms of language, to distinction. In contrast with this concept of distinction, the effect of money becomes evident among the whole range of purchasable goods, an effect that prostitution, monetary marriage and bribery have illustrated in a personally accentuated form. 2. The transformation of specific rights into monetary claims. We have demonstrated in the chapter on individual freedom how much the transformation of obligations in kind into money payments are to the advantage of both parties, and to what extent particularly the dependent person gains liberty and dignity. Money's importance for personal values must now be extended by a line of development in the opposite direction. The favorable result of that transformation was due to the fact that the obligated person had hitherto contributed a personal strength and individual determinateness to the relationship without receiving a proportional equivalent. What the other party offered him was of a purely impersonal nature. The rights that he received from the relationship were relatively impersonal, the obligations that he accepted were completely personal. In that these obligations became depersonalized by taking on the form of money payments, the disproportion between them was removed. However, the result will be completely different if the obligated person cannot simply be paid off with a concrete return, but if he has acquired a right, an influence, a personal importance through this relationship, and this is precisely because he contributes such a definite personal service to that relationship. Under such circumstances, the objectification of the relationship brought about by changing to the money form of payment will have unfavorable results just as in